I'm honored to be here with you all again today. For those of you who've been here before, thank you for coming back. And for anyone who's new, thank you for joining me. Today, we're going to be really taking a look at the Montessori philosophy and pedagogy beyond the materials. For those of you who've been here before, Montessori is definitely a passion of mine, and hopefully you've been able to pick up on some of those important elements that we've discussed in previous sessions: independence, a connection with nature. We'll be talking about responsibility. There's just so many pieces that really extend the Montessori philosophy beyond just those materials that Dr. Montessori developed that are so iconic. And that's what we're really going to be diving into today. Before we do that, though, I'd love to share a little bit about myself as the host and the creator of this presentation. So as Clara said, my name is Heather White. I'm a former Montessori classroom teacher, administrator, and in-home caregiver with 15 years of experience now in the world of Montessori. I currently work as an educational consultant, an instructional guide for learners who are working to receive their Montessori certification through the Center for Guided Montessori Studies. And I'm a blog writer and content creator for a few different organizations, including the American Montessori Society, Guide and Grow, and Mirrors Toys. I hold certifications from the American Montessori Society in the 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 age groups. I've also taught at the 9 to 12 level. I have a master's in education with a concentration in Montessori studies and an education specialist degree in school psychology. I'm also a nationally certified school psychologist. So here's an overview of what we'll look at today. During our time together, we'll cover a range of topics, starting with just a brief discussion of what Montessori is. We'll then dive deeper, exploring what Montessori is beneath the surface level, revealing how Montessori is really a philosophy and a way of life. We'll look at how key principles of the Montessori method, such as being present, conscious, and intentional, or things like instilling freedoms, incorporating elements of practical life, engaging in regular observation of the child, and facilitating a child's independence, how those things really underpin the Montessori method and really embody what the method is as a philosophical and pedagogical approach. We'll then explore how learning can happen outside of the four walls of a classroom or even a home environment, expanding Montessori beyond just what happens with the materials. And then we'll take a look at the transformation of the adult, which is a really key piece of the Montessori approach. We'll conclude by taking a look at some resources that might be helpful in discovering more about this topic if you're wanting to learn more after the presentation. So I'd love to start, those of you who've been in a presentation of mine, I'd love for it to be interactive. So I just wanted to start here with a question, and this could be from your personal experiences. Maybe you've attended a session and have gained some knowledge about Montessori, but what is Montessori? Again, feel free to use the chat feature or to use the raise hand reaction to just share in a few words, maybe a couple sentences, what is Montessori? Everybody just a couple seconds to ponder that, even if you don't choose to share out loud. Maybe you just think to yourself from what you've learned or the experiences that you've had, what the Montessori is as a philosophy, what it is as a pedagogy, what kind of skills are included. We're going to keep moving forward. I'm sure things will come up as we keep moving. Sometimes other slides foster some thoughts for us. So let's keep going. And if anything comes up, oh, I see a chat, raise hand and a chat. Education in a different method. Yes, it's a different approach to education. Emmanuel, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, so Montessori basically is a kind of a system of education for young children that seek to develop natural interest and also that involves activity rather than the use of formal teaching methods.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emmanuel. And you know, a couple of points that Emmanuel mentioned there, right? And we're going to dive into this a little bit as well. You know, he was mentioning these specific activities, that it's a way of learning for children. I've been doing some research lately. There's a lot of information that has come out about Montessori being used with the elderly population, with the aging population, sometimes the same materials, but the approach being helpful with them as well. Dr. Montessori also talked about how the philosophy could be used with the adolescent population, and what she described as the farm school, right? Or Erdkinder was the title that she used. So it really is this approach that, in addition to these activities she developed, is something that spans the lifetime, and really can be useful for any age individual, but definitely has its roots. Her original approach was actually with the age group of 3 to 6. That's where she started her original Casa dei Bambini, or children's house. Emmanuel, did you have something you wanted to add?
Okay, no. I think this is my mistake.
No worries. I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything. Thank you. So let's jump in then and see kind of a basis from Dr. Montessori herself about how she summed up Montessori. So she once was quoted to say, "The child, making use of all that he finds around him, shapes himself for the future." And I really felt like this was the perfect starting point for our discussion today, because it really clearly captivates Dr. Maria Montessori's belief that is the foundation of the Montessori philosophy, which is that idea that Montessori is more than just the materials. It really is this philosophical approach. It's this way of life. It's the idea that the child, or the individual, if we think outside of those first few years of life, really makes use of the things that are in their environment and uses that to shape himself by gaining knowledge, gaining experiences, and really developing themselves for the future. So especially with the rise in social media presence today, right? We have Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, Facebook. I mean, the list goes on, right? And because of that, we are kind of inundated with these pictures and ideas, these Pinterest and Instagram photos of these pristine Montessori prepared environments with this multitude of beautiful, luxurious, handcrafted, and most likely very expensive materials. And so people start to think that Montessori is out of reach for them. They start to think there's no way that they could afford to embrace the Montessori philosophy or pedagogy. With Montessori, because the materials are so captivating, right? Like here in the top left corner, or I'm sorry, on the left-hand side, you see the Montessori bead cabinet. And I mean, there's no doubt, no question that the materials are absolutely beautiful. Even as adults, we are so drawn to them, right? The colors, the small details. But it's important that we try not to allow ourselves to be consumed by this idea of stuff, right? And that being the key component of Montessori. Because although the materials are beautiful and inviting and captivating, even for us as adults, they really don't embody the spirit or the philosophy of Montessori. They're really just a tool to help us in allowing the child to explore and discover on their own. That's really what we're looking for, is that independent exploration and discovery for the child. And there's so much more to the Montessori philosophy and to just learning and discovering on its own beyond the shelves, beyond these beautiful materials. So a clear distinction needs to be made between the Montessori materials and the Montessori method. While the Montessori materials complement the pedagogy and complement the method, they're absolutely no substitute for the lifestyle or the mindset of the authentic Montessori method that Dr. Montessori talked about. So it's important to just keep in mind that Montessori goes beyond the materials. It really is this state of mind. It's a way of life. It really is this philosophical approach beyond those things, that stuff that we get so enamored with. I see a note in chat here that someone is having some difficulty with sound. I'm not sure if Clara, you're able to respond in chat on how they can address that issue. So the first thing to start with then, when we're thinking about how we embrace this Montessori philosophy, this Montessori way of life, Montessori parents, caregivers, and educators should all try to remember that it's not just the Montessori activities or the lessons that we present with those materials. It really is about how we engage with the child. It's about being present, being conscious, and being very intentional with them. It's about giving them love and showing them respect, just as we want them to give us love and show us respect. So some ways that you can do that is first, try to avoid interrupting the child when they're concentrating. Demonstrate trust by allowing them to make their own decisions and discover their own mistakes rather than pointing them out to them or trying to fix it for them. Observe them without judgment. Just step back and watch what they're doing and see what they're learning or what they're interested in, and try to allow them to kind of lead the charge, if you will, and what they're interested in discovering. Acknowledge and validate their feelings. You know, when you notice that they're having these big feelings, as children will, just label them, right? I see that you're feeling angry. Let them know that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel angry. And then you can follow that up with a choice, right? You know, you can always set limits within that. It's okay to feel angry, and I can't let you hurt your sister, right? So you can set limits while also still respecting the child and letting them know that you recognize where they are and how they're feeling, and that's okay. So you're being kind but firm, or kind but clear is a great way I've heard it described as well. Use soft hands and kind words with them. Speak to them just as you would an adult. I think that's a really important one, because so often, because babies, especially toddlers, very young children, are so cute, right? And they're so much smaller than us. We get into this mindset of babying them, or, you know, some people use this baby talk or gibberish, right? One simple way that you can show a young child respect is to use very simple language, but talk to them just as you would another adult, because after all, they are a human being. And sometimes they're capable of so much more than we give them credit for. So letting them know by speaking to them as you would another adult, you're sending a message to them that you trust them. You're sending a message to them that you believe they're capable, that you have confidence in them, so that they can internalize those same feelings. Stop and really listen to what they have to say. Watch their expressions, watch their facial expressions, watch their hand movements. Truly see and hear the child so that you really understand what it is, because sometimes their words might not always match their actions. And so this really gives you a clear picture of what's happening and what they need, what they're feeling. Allow time and space for things like movement, for conversation, for them to walk at their own pace, right? When you go on a walk around the neighborhood, or you take your class outside, if you're an educator, let them lead, let them set the pace so that they know they have that little bit of respect, and that you're showing them that trust and that confidence. You're being very present with them. You're looking at the things they're interested in, the ladybug on the tree branch, the ants crossing the sidewalk. Even for conversation, that time and space, right? pausing to allow a young child to process what you're saying and giving them time to respond as well, knowing that it might take a little bit longer than an adult. Find ways that you can work with them. Get down on their level and look them in the eye when you're having a conversation with them. And probably most importantly, accept them for who they are and for who they're becoming. This was something that Dr. Montessori talked about. And, it was the idea that we need to embrace the child for who they are right now in this moment, but also be able to see who they will become in the future. And it's our responsibility as what she described as the prepared adult to help guide them to that place. So the next thing here, the next element is freedom. This is another element of the Montessori method, Montessori philosophy and pedagogy that I wanted to highlight that really goes beyond the materials. So freedom is a hallmark of the Montessori method. And within that, it's the idea that children should be allowed to explore their environments and really take ownership of their learning and their growth and development. The concept of freedom even comes into play in regards to the child's engagement with those materials that we're describing the method going beyond, right? Regardless of how costly or how beautiful these materials are, the materials really are only as good as the sense of independence that the child feels when interacting with them. So a lot of times, especially as Montessori certified guides, educators in the classroom, we have this tendency to interrupt when a child is not using a material the way it was intended to be used. And even a parent who maybe has, watched a video or read in one of Dr. Montessori's texts or taken up maybe a professional development course of how certain lessons are to be given, how certain materials are to be used. We want to redirect them to help them use the material the right way, to make sure they're learning what they're supposed to. And Dr. Montessori actually talked about in one of her writings that unless the child is just, being destructive to the material, distracting to a friend, unless they're really causing harm by what they're doing, to allow them to explore, because perhaps they're using it in a way that they'll teach us something, in a way the material could be used differently. And she really had this idea that children instinctively knew what their minds and their bodies needed to learn and to grow. And so we should lean into that and allow them to explore and step back and observe so that we could see what it was they were really focusing on. What is it that they're really trying to learn? What need is being met by the way they're using that material? So the good news then for us as parents and caregivers and educators is that, especially if we're working on a budget, right, is that this concept of freedom is free. There's no monetary cost associated with needing to provide or helping to provide children with autonomy. We don't need to get caught up on the pink tower, the brown stair, the golden beads, right? We don't need all of these expensive Montessori materials that we're so drawn to and the children are drawn to instill freedom, to allow for freedom of movement, to allow for freedom of work in the classroom, to give them that sense of autonomy. I see a note here in the chat. Good afternoon. My name is Abraham from Ethiopia. Would you give me the specific objectives of the lesson that's intended to deliver? It is a course wiser training. Is that has scheduled curriculum certification issues? Make it clear. So Clara could speak to that as well in the chat here, as far as what that looks like on your end for the class. I do believe if you complete, I've heard Dr. Valken mention in the past that there's a form that you can fill out that you can turn in within your portal to receive some credits, but that's something that Clara would have to clarify for you from the university. So for those of you that were here a few weeks ago, for my presentation on the prepared environment, we talked about this idea that less is more already. There's this principle of less is more within the Montessori philosophy, because clutter tends to create this sense of chaos and tends to leave children feeling overstimulated and therefore overwhelmed, which deters them from their learning. It deters them from engaging with the materials and really developing this sense of independence and freedom that we're looking for. So again, the great news for parents, caregivers, and educators who are wanting to practice the Montessori method is that you don't need to purchase a multitude of expensive materials, right? The materials are great, I'm not saying that, but instead you can focus on investing in a small number of really high quality learning materials that are a fit for an individual child, or depending on the ages of the students in your classroom, for their specific interests and developmental levels, so that you have a few things, this small number, right, of materials that really speak to them and are really meaningful, that they can connect to, rather than this wealth of materials that really becomes overwhelming and overstimulating for the child, and may even discourage them from engaging with the materials, and therefore discourage them from continuing to explore and to learn and to grow autonomously. Another key component of Montessori is the practical life curriculum. So again, if you were here a few weeks ago, we really dived deep into this fundamental piece of the Montessori philosophy and pedagogy, and how it emphasizes a child's participation in daily life activities, things like cooking, cleaning, gardening, dressing oneself, care in the restroom, like brushing your teeth, brushing your hair. All of these activities are intended to foster a child's independence, while also helping them really develop their fine and gross motor skills. It also allows them the opportunity to practice grace and courtesy, which in Montessori is this idea of social skill development, right? It's how they interact with one another's in their own families, in their classrooms, and in their communities. So these practical life activities are another key element of the Montessori method that costs little to nothing to implement. By their very nature, these activities require materials that are often already found in a home setting, and that educators can probably very easily find within their own homes or around a school environment as well. It's often encouraged to have things be child size, right? That's another element of Montessori. The shelves are at the child's level, the chairs and tables are child size, because this really shows respect to the child, that the environment is theirs. So although that's encouraged with the materials as well, and using child size items like brooms, gardening tools, pitchers for pouring, or utensils like spoons, you can substitute these things for other common household items that are better suited for the child's size. For instance, the child could use a spoon instead of a shovel for gardening. So you don't need to go out and buy a child size shovel. You could just give them a spoon to use instead. Instead of buying a child size pitcher to allow them to practice pouring their own drink, you could give them a drinking cup, an adult sized drinking cup, because that's the size of a pitcher for them. And the idea here is that these practical life activities really give children the opportunity to engage in this meaningful, purposeful work. So even things that seem mundane to us, right? Like washing a window, washing dishes, sweeping, getting dressed. These things that we just take for granted that are part of our everyday lives are really meaningful to them, because they have this deep sense of purpose when they complete the activity. And that's why children find them so rewarding and so fulfilling. Depending on the age of the child, other examples might be for an older child, maybe they prep a meal for the family and themselves. Maybe they pick fresh fruit and bring in and wash and chop and provide it as a snack for the family, chopping firewood even, taking messages on the phone for a parent who's unavailable. All of these things give them a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning, and are activities that extend, once again, beyond those things you just see on the shelf, beyond the Montessori materials that are often what people really focus on for the Montessori method. But this is an inherent part and such an important practice of Montessori. I see some good days and good afternoons in the chat. Thank you for being here. So once again, if you were here several weeks ago, I had a session on observation as well, which is another crucial element of the Montessori method. It's something that Dr. Montessori believed was so vital to understanding the child, to determining their interest, their level, and providing experiences and activities that aligned with those things. And it really is this art and this science that you kind of hone in on as the prepared adult, whether that's a parent, a caregiver, or an educator. It's yet another hallmark of the Montessori method that requires no materials at all. You just need to step back and watch the child and consider questions like, how does the child play? How do they interact with another child or other adults? What are they drawn to? What are their interests? How do they solve problems, whether that's independently when they're, trying to figure out how to use something, or when there's another child in the environment. Let's say they want the yellow truck and another child is playing with it. What do they do? How does their body move? Looking at their fine motor skills, their fingers, how they can pick things up, their gross motor skills. Are they crawling? Are they rolling over? Are they walking? Can they jump? Can they skip? Can they hop? Do they like to stay still instead of move about? Are they a helper? Do they like things to be very orderly and clean? How do they respond to different types of sensory stimuli, like lights or sound in the environment? If they're old enough to talk, what kinds of things do they talk about? What does their speech sound like? Can you understand them? Can other people understand what they're saying? How do they relate to other children and other adults? And observation not only includes considering these questions, but really listening to your child's questions as well. And then also looking inwardly to consider your own thoughts, your own needs, and your own desires as a parent, a caregiver, or an educator. Dr. Montessori talked about 3 types of observations. She talked about direct observation, indirect observation, and self-observation. Direct observation being, I'm stepping back, I'm not engaging at all with the child, I'm just watching what they do. Indirect observation is when you are involved with something that the child's doing. Maybe they're helping you cook dinner, and while engaging in that activity together, you're observing the way that they are picking up the utensils, their fine motor skills, how they're solving problems. You're watching those things while they're doing the activity with you. That's indirect. And then self-observation is that third point there, of really considering your own thoughts and your own needs and your own desires, looking inwardly. So although the shelves and the materials may be beautiful, those things mean nothing without observation, just as we've described, with the previous concepts we talked about of the practical life and the independence, the freedom. All those beautiful materials mean nothing unless we can step back as the prepared adult and observe the child, because observation is what allows us to really understand what the child is learning, how they're growing, how they're developing, what their interests are, and to engage in what Dr. Montessori described as following the child, letting them be the leader. So without observation, we cannot effectively implement the Montessori method with fidelity. Fostering independence is one of the primary goals of the Montessori method. Again, independence doesn't require purchasing any materials, purchasing any shelves. It really can be as simple as rearranging items within the environment so that they're within the child's reach. It's about teaching them rules and boundaries, providing them freedom within limits. Those are the things we talked about, right? You can, in previous sessions, if you've been here, we talked about the choice isn't putting your shoes on because we have to go, but you can decide, do you want to put your shoes on inside the house or inside the car? Or do you want to put your left shoe on first or your right shoe on first? That's an example of freedom within limits. And then also sitting back and observing rather than telling a child what to do. When possible, allow them to figure things out on their own, allow them to make mistakes so that they can learn from them. For instance, if they're carrying a pitcher and instead of carrying it with two hands, let's say they're carrying a glass of water or a pitcher of water, a small pitcher of water. Instead of carrying it with two hands, they're only carrying it with one. You could step in and save the day and show them how to carry it with two hands so that they don't spill it. But if you allow them to have that moment where they spill the water, it's a teachable opportunity for them where they not only learn how to clean up a mess, but also it makes a greater impression on them, and they're more likely in the future to remember that they need to carry that pitcher or that glass with two hands instead of one so they don't make the same mistake again. So that's where they learn those skills of independence. And it's through this independence that they build this sense of self-confidence. They build this sense of capability. They start to really take responsibility for how their actions impact the environment and how it impacts others. Although the Montessori activities, the Montessori materials, are very carefully crafted and beautifully arranged, often on these organic, natural types of trays or baskets, that's really only a small piece of what Dr. Maria Montessori encouraged was important and valuable about the Montessori method, the Montessori approach. In fact, she really encouraged that learning can happen everywhere, not just within the four walls of a Montessori indoor classroom, a Montessori outdoor environment even, or even in a playroom in a home setting. I mentioned the outdoor environment for those of you who were here a few weeks ago. That was a topic of a presentation, right, of connecting to nature, back to nature, and how the Montessori pedagogy supports that and encourages that. And Dr. Montessori really did emphasize the need for children to have this contact with the natural world, taking children outside and exploring nature together, whether it's a child-led walk, like we talked about earlier, maybe it's to garden, to wash the car, to go to a nearby park even. All of these things help children develop this sense of awe and wonder and an appreciation for the world that we live in. And it also helps them really understand their place in the world and how their actions impact the world around them, others outside of their classroom or home environments as well, and really become what Dr. Montessori talked about as a global citizen, where they're giving back and helping others and their environment. Sometimes you could even bring these elements of nature back inside the classroom or the home as well to facilitate learning in a really cost-effective way that doesn't require buying anything. For instance, here in the center of the screen, you see a basket of various objects, a flower maybe that you pick. It could be pine cones, sticks, rocks. Maybe if you live by an ocean, it might be driftwood, sand, shells. All of these things can be used for counting, can be used to provide this rich sensorial experience and in the classroom or the home environment, in a sensory basket where a child can feel the different textures, even maybe hold a shell up to their ear and have this rich sensorial experience of hearing the ocean, right? There's so many different ways these natural elements can kind of take learning to the next level inside as well. I see a note here in the chat. Hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly. Livinus says, children learn by doing and grow by learning. Absolutely. And that was the idea with the Montessori materials when Dr. Montessori developed them, was that hands-on connection, the connection between the hand and the brain allowed them this meaningful learning experience. But that same meaningful learning experience by doing can happen outside of those materials as well. In all of these ways that we're describing, right? A connection with nature, the practical life activities, all of these things are still helping children to learn by doing. The Montessori philosophy and pedagogy is absolutely amazing and sounds so appealing and so inviting, I think, as adults, that we might want to just dive in head first. But really, as parents and caregivers and educators, to really embrace the Montessori method as it is, we need to have this transformation that Dr. Montessori described. It's not a transformation within the child we're looking for, it's a transformation within ourselves. And that actually is one of the first things that needs to happen. And this doesn't occur when those carefully designed, beautiful materials are perfectly arranged on the shelves, or when we create that prepared environment. And this is what Dr. Montessori described as a spiritual transformation that occurs when we, as parents and caregivers and educators, come to truly understand and internalize the philosophy. Maybe we start reading and learning more about the method. We focus on preparing ourselves physically by slowing down our movements so that we model this state of tranquility for children. And we also turn inward and consider our own needs and our own desires. These were the three pieces of the transformation that Dr. Montessori described. She talked about the physical transformation, right? That's slowing down and being a model. She talked about the intellectual preparation. That's that learning more. Maybe you're watching this presentation, you're reading her text about the method. And then also the spiritual transformation, which I personally think is the most important. That's where we really look inward. Maybe you're journaling, reflecting, maybe thinking about how you were raised as a child, how you were parented, what your educational experience was like. There's this idea of reparenting, where you look at what worked well in your experience as a child and what didn't, and you heal from any trauma and make conscious efforts moving forward of what you will implement as a parent or caregiver and what you will release and let go of. So those are the three elements of the adult's transformation that Dr. Montessori described that really do help change our frame of mind as the prepared adult and allow us to continue to learn and grow alongside the child. Before I share some resources here and then open it up to questions, I wanted to just end with a final quote from Dr. Montessori that I think really highlights and emphasizes the true essence of what the Montessori method is beyond the materials. In 1946, Dr. Montessori held a series of lectures in London. This is a quote from one of her London lectures. She said, "Everyone said it was my marvelous method which gave this ability to children, and everyone was enthusiastic about it. However, it was neither the school nor the method which produced the phenomenon. It was the expression of the power of the small child, and it was a revelation of something that had hitherto remained unknown. The important thing was the discovery of the surprising power of the young child." So even if you don't have a room full of beautiful, handcrafted, traditional Montessori materials, there's no need to despair. If instead you focus on observing the child, identifying work that's meaningful and purposeful for them, encourage their independence, allow time for those natural learning experiences, and also give yourself time and space to allow that transformation to happen so you can really embrace Dr. Montessori's life work. Those are the things that are most important. That's where the Montessori method truly lies, because there is so much more to Montessori than just the beautiful shelves and the beautiful materials. And this quote here that Dr. Montessori has is reflected on the screen about the power of the young child. And I would, kind of expand that to even say our power and what we're capable of as the prepared adult as well. That is the heart of Montessori, right? That lies within us. We just need to explore it and to embrace it. The Montessori materials can be helpful with that, but are not really the heart of the philosophy itself. It's that spiritual transformation and allowing that growth and development of the child and honoring it. So if you're interested in learning more about that heart of Montessori beyond those materials, I would encourage you to take a look at the book Aid to Life, Montessori Beyond the Classroom. This is by Susan Macklin Stevenson. She has quite a few books that she's written. They do tend to be a little shorter, so it's nice if you're looking for a quick read as well. She has lots of different books on different topics that are wonderful, but this one specifically is how the Montessori approach is an aid to life and how that goes beyond the classroom. So definitely applicable to this topic. And then there are also some great blogs on this topic, a few from Guide and Grow. Multilingual Montessori has a great one, and also the blog called Montessori Nuggets has a great blog on this topic article as well. I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for being here. While I answer some questions, again, feel free to add them in the chat or to use the raise hand reaction. But while we are preparing to do that, I will leave my contact information here on the screen for you. My email address is there if you have any follow-up questions or comments. My LinkedIn is there. If you have a LinkedIn account and you'd like to give me a follow there, that would be wonderful. I also have my website there and my Facebook and Instagram handle, which is at montessori.matters. On my website and on social media, I share parenting and education related content, mostly Montessori in nature, but also some other conscious parenting and educating strategies as well. So it would be wonderful if you all followed along. And I will open it up now to questions. I see in the chat, thank you, Eddie. And then I see some raised hand. Oh, one more in the chat. At which stage can a child learn by example from the parents? That's a great question. Children can really start to learn by example from infancy. They're really observing every single thing that we do. And so it's really important that we are intentional, that we are conscious, that we are considering what we're doing when we're in the environment with them and what we're modeling. If you go beyond that to when children are toddlers, that's when they really start to mimic everything that we're doing. Dr. Montessori talked about children in the first plane of development. That was what she described as the different periods of growth. So from ages 0 to 6 is the first plane of development. From 0 to 3, she said it was an unconscious absorbent mind, meaning the children were just absorbing things around them without even knowing they were doing so. And then from 3 to 6, it's the conscious absorbent mind. So they're absorbing things from their environment and then they're mimicking that behavior. So although a child's the 0 to 3 might not indicate or show you any acknowledgement that they are learning by example from you, they are. They might not just even be aware of it yet, right? But in that period of 3 to 6 is when they really start to mimic what you're doing, which is an indication to us, an outward indication that they are learning by our example. Adults can learn from children by creating an environment for the child to learn and grow and paying attention to their child and their environment. Absolutely. Those are key elements of the Montessori philosophy, right? Creating that prepared environment that they have the opportunity to learn and to grow within, and then paying attention, observing how they learn and grow in that environment and beyond. Some thank yous are here. I'm so happy you all felt it was helpful for you to be here. Thank you so much. I see some raised hands. Let's go there now. I believe Salisu, I think you were first. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Madam. Good to see you again.
Thank you for being here once again.
Thank you so much. So considering the presentation and the whole education about these children, we are talking about by doing and by learning. And they learn everything that we do. So my question goes this way. How do professional people like you in this field consider the children that come out of war? For example, the Ukraine war, and recently we are seeing Palestine-Israel war. Like, if we are saying whatever we do, the children learn from us. When we carry gun, they carry gun. When we say do good, they do good. So I'm just asking now, in your own perspective, whether you have this experience, how do we also bring back our children that come out of war, out of trauma, in this your field of experience? Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's a great question. I'm glad that you mentioned, right, trauma there at the end, because I think that war is just one of many types of trauma, right? And I think that for us as educators, parents, caregivers, even, it's going to take a lot of therapy for children who have had these traumatic experiences, whether that's war, maybe it's a divorce, maybe it was some kind of abuse, right? There's lots of different traumatic experiences. It could be the death of a family member, that children will need to have the ability to work through therapeutically. They need to have their feelings acknowledged and validated. They need to be able to talk about their thoughts and their feelings and really feel like they're heard. But I think, and Montessori, right, is one way that encourages that kind of intentionality, creating that space and that respect for children. But I think sometimes it really does need a professional who is trained in kind of handling and helping children work through trauma as well. I did have a session a few months ago. I'm doing some work with Montessori UA, which is a nonprofit organization that is working to bring Montessori resources to educators and to parents that are actually in Ukraine. And it's a wonderful organization. The leader, Anna, who runs the program, is just so wonderful. But I had a session on facilitating concentration in the classroom. It was Montessori educators that were there and helping them, because something that they're seeing is that the children have a hard time concentrating when they're coming into the classroom, and understandably so, because they're so distraught, right? Their emotions are so high that, and you know, the way the brain works is if you're in your emotional brain, if you're in that state of fight or flight, if you will, you can't reach the thinking part of your brain, which allows that deep concentration. And so they're really seeing that the children, because of this emotional trauma, that they're having a hard time concentrating in the classroom. And what we talked about was really just going back to the basics of trying to create a safe place for them, right? Create that sense of belonging. Let them know that they can trust you, that they can trust one another. So again, look beyond the materials for a little while until that sense of trust is established, where they feel like they're safe being there with you. Really focus on that community building aspect first. Show them respect, give them opportunities to be heard, acknowledge and validate their feelings, have these community building activities where they're singing songs together or reading books together, things that help them feel connected to one another and to you as the educator in the environment, or even as the parent, right, within the home. But really creating ways that that trust, that sense of safety, that sense of belonging is established, because all of that has to be in existence for them to move beyond that into accessing the materials or doing any kind of learning. And so that's what I would say, if you're in that situation, or even outside of it, right? Let's say the war has ended, but children are still going to hold on to those feelings of uncertainty, not feeling safe, is really try to work on that community building to establish that safety and trust first, and then focus on the academics.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
I see a note here in the chat. A couple of questions, it looks like. Do you believe that Montessori's methods and materials are dedicated only for children's education, or is it possible to use them in other levels of education, like secondary or higher education learners? I think it depends on where the individual is in their learning and in their intellectual development, right? Because the entire point of the materials that were developed for certain age children in mind, right? Dr. Montessori developed materials that she recommended for use in the early childhood environment, which is 3 to 6 years old. She recommended materials that were to be used in elementary, which is 6 to 12 years old. For secondary, for adolescents, Dr. Montessori's approach was this sense of, or this Erdkinder, I'll put that word in the chat in case anyone's interested in looking it up. But it was this farm school where children took care of the animals. They harvested, different kinds of vegetables and fruits. They took care of the animals. They, got milk from the cows and eggs from the chickens, not only to sustain themselves, but then they also sold these materials and created this type of business. And that's what she encouraged was necessary at the adolescent level, because children needed to understand their connection to others in the community. They had this really big need to understand their relationship with the community and to feel a sense of value in the community itself. I did mention at the beginning of the presentation, when we were talking about the materials and how wonderful they are, there's actually a lot of work going on right now with the aging community and using some Montessori sensorial materials like the brown stair, the pink tower, but also practical life activities like sewing, cutting, pasting, scooping, spooning, pouring, right? All of these things that we help young children practice in the classroom or at home, helping the aging community do that in a way that gives them that same sense of meaning and purpose, but also is keeping their fine motor skills really well fine-tuned, and also is creating this connection between the hand and the brain, where their intellectual development is continuing to be stimulated. So I think the materials can be used with other ages. It just depends on where that individual is in their journey, right? Looking at their development, their intellectual growth of what is the right fit, because that's what's most important, is not what age group the materials were intended for, but what is right for that individual of where they are in their journey. And then, in my experience in the classroom in general, there were certain children that came up to the lower elementary classroom in 1st through 3rd grade that maybe needed a material that was typically used in the 3 to 6 classroom, because they just needed a little more time. They needed a little more practice, or vice versa. I had children in my 1st through 3rd grade classroom that were ready for something else. And we brought down materials that were typically used in upper elementary and 4th through 6th grade and brought that down into the 1st through 3rd grade classroom because they were ready for the next step. So I would say, it really just depends on the individual and where they are. But as far as were there any materials developed specifically for secondary age groups or higher education, that answer would be no. That doesn't mean that an individual might not benefit from them, though, depending on where they are, intellectually.